Okay. Good afternoon. We are talking about spiritual bypassing today. I am Dr. Maiysha, founder of the Mind ReMapping Academy. Now, you'll see me looking sometimes to the right, to the left. I am living, as you all know, I have multiple streams, so I will live from Instagram as well as on the streams that you see me on here. Oh, look at my hair, looking a little bit. So, and I'm at the desktop today on StreamYard, as you all can see, so that I don't have to do another encore like I did last week. So thank you all for joining me. So, last week we talked about this thing called toxic positivity. And, like I said, it had been on my mind. And there's a particular flavor, and I mentioned it last week. I mentioned spiritual bypassing last week, but it's a particular flavor of toxic positivity that, in essence, does a very similar thing as the toxic positivity, which is it invalidates and avoids dealing with the deeper issue. So I want to first, just kind of like talk about what it is for those who may not know. Um, People who, the spiritual bypassing is a way that people sometimes wield their spirituality as a way to protect themselves from difficult conversations, from dealing with deeper issues, and from resolving even deeper trauma. And so that when people are avoiding feelings of anger, when you see people who are just like always happy, always all the time, when they use spirituality as a way of being superior to others, if they when they avoid um, talking about anything that's negative, um, when they believe that all spiritual practice and meditative practices have to be a positive experience. You can hear where the toxic positivity is coming in, right? When there's this unrealistic idealism that's in place, when people are overly optimistic or even projecting their own negative feelings on others. These are like some of the signs when people think they have to rise above their negative emotions, rise above their emotions or the negative thoughts. And people say, "Oh, just be positive about it. Just pray it away." And look, no shade to people who practice religion, who practice spirituality. I myself do, but we have to begin to recognize and understand the nature of this thing that is toxic positivity, that is spiritual bypassing. So this whole piece of spiritual bypass happens in multiple communities. It happens in church communities. It happens in, um, you know, Christian church communities, non-Christian spiritual communities. Even I've read about Buddhist teachers who've talked about spiritual bypassing happening. It happens in yoga communities. I can tell you that, I've been a part of yoga community for 15 years. And, it's not something that I see in everyone, but you do see it from time to time. You do see some people who wield that sort of space of, I'm a spiritual person, I'm rising above, this is not me, separating themselves from negativity when, uh, the world is the world, only seeing that spiritual piece and not seeing what's present, the world around them, and not acknowledging it. In fact, when the whole George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, when that in the pandemic, when all of that was happening during 2020, that's when I saw a lot of that coming up in some of my communities. And so the question is, what is the fine line? Because do you want to, have this sort of positive outlook or empowered, I should say, because empowerment doesn't always equal positive. And I think that's where people get mixed up. So what's the line? What is the line that crosses into toxic positivity or spiritual bypassing? What is the line? Well, let's distinguish this whole piece of empowerment, because empowerment gives you the access to being at the source of one's life, even if there are negative emotions. See, our emotions, we're human, right? And therefore we have emotions. And our emotions are valid. Our emotions are signals that something doesn't feel right. And if we don't acknowledge those emotions in ourselves and in others, you hear me talk a lot about my kiddo, you know, I talk a lot about, organizations. I could talk about relationships. I could talk about this in any area of life. So wherever you are, whatever you're applying this to, whether it's business or relationship or parenting or organizationally, if you're a leader in DEI, you're like, well, how does this apply? Map it on, right? Have the ability to map what I'm saying on here. So when a lot of people think, if you just be positive enough, if you just think positive enough, if you just focus on what you want, then all of the negative stuff will disappear. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Now, yes, you want to focus forward and focus on what you want, but you don't do that without acknowledging, especially if you're bumping up against the same obstacles, the same walls. You don't do that without acknowledging the conversations that are keeping you disempowered, that are causing negative emotion like fear, or causing negative emotion like anger or outbursts, especially if these things are recurring. If you're finding yourself blowing up at things in a way that feels more than maybe it should be, and you will know what that is. Or if someone, and I have to be careful about how I say this, right? If you're noticing that there's a lot of feedback coming from people who you know and trust, that is indicating that maybe some of the responses and reactions that you're having are beyond, or maybe an indication of something deeper, then you might want to take a look. It's always good to take a look, whether or not at the end of the day you agree. It's always good to take a look, because if we automatically just react and just bounce things off, even for people who will likely be inaccurate, if we don't at least take a look, then we miss the opportunity to grow. So being empowered is being able to take the uncomfortable, look deeper, and be in charge and be at the source of what happens next. That's not always positive. It doesn't always feel good. But to utilize, and we do this a lot, by the way. Lots of communities do this a lot, where we'll busy ourselves focusing our mind on something else to avoid the discomfort, of whatever it is that we want to not be dealing with, whether it is a particular conversation with a spouse or in a relationship, whether it's a conversation about race, whether it's, whatever the conversation is, whether it's a conversation from a boss to an employee, about performance review, whether it's a conversation, whether you need to go and apologize to your kid for, for acting out of character, even if they may have done something that was inappropriate, right? We busy ourselves with other things to avoid the discomfort of those conversations. And a lot of times what's easy to do is to focus our mind only on the spiritual practice, right? And not look deeper and start to clean out the mess, the trauma, the old conversations that contribute, excuse me, that contribute to these responses and reactions. And so we need to start, keeping our internal ears and external ears open for these types of spiritual bypassing actions or behaviors in ourselves, because we can be responsible for ourselves. It's easy to point the finger and say, oh, you're doing that, your spiritual life, or they are doing that. And it's important that, if especially in an organization where that's happening and it's preventing progress, for it to be named. You can name something. You can name something without blaming, without accusing, right? There's a way to do it, to name a behavior without being accusatory. There's a way to name a behavior um, without spitting fire, if you will. So when it's happening and you're hearing that it's happening, you can name it in an effective way. So the way I do it, especially when I work with leaders and organizations and people who tend to be, um, uh, let's say, maybe a little bit fragile to feedback and criticism, is there's a name for what's happening right now, and it's called toxic positivity, or it's called spiritual bypassing, or it's called tokenism, or it's called whatever it's called. So naming it, if you're empowering someone else, naming it is you can do that in a way that is effective. But and I should say, by and large, we also want to watch out for that in ourselves. Now, especially for us people who, we thrive on keeping things positive, keeping ourselves empowered. That's what we teach. That's especially for me, my whole business and world is teaching people the language of transformation, the language of empowerment. But that doesn't come without my own human experience. It doesn't come without some trials, and I even have to be mindful to acknowledge when there are negative emotions happening. There are limiting beliefs and decisions, and sometimes it's hard to name those. Sometimes you can't even name the emotion. I know for myself, sometimes it's just, I'm feeling off today. I'm not feeling my best self, or I'm feeling like in a space. And we have to understand that it's okay to acknowledge that. And as a person who is receiving feedback from someone who's not feeling well, it is okay to say, there's something about fill in the blank that doesn't make you feel good, right? Validating experience rather than spiritually bypassing another's experience. Because when we do that, we invalidate their experience. I was listening to something earlier today, a podcast, and the woman says, she was talking about our communication with our children, and she was talking about validating our children's experience. And she says, we often think that in order to validate our children's experience, we have to understand why they're doing a thing, why they are hi Gia, why they are doing a thing, why they're reacting the way they are. But the truth is, we don't have to understand why the behavior is happening why the experience is uncomfortable in order to validate the experience itself, right? So this is very applicable with anyone. Rather than going straight to fix it mode, or going straight to, positive, or going straight to coaching mode, how about we validate the experience that's happening? And it could be something like, wow, I really got that's uncomfortable for you. We don't have to solve the problem. We simply have to acknowledge that there is a problem, right? And that gives you access to have deeper conversation, further conversation. So in our relationships, whether it's our relationships with our partners and spouses, or in our businesses, in our organizations, between leaders between leaders and employees, between leaders and managers, between cultures and races, and like different backgrounds or lived experiences, we have to remember that you don't have to understand a person's experience in order to validate it, right? And to to completely step over the acknowledging of an experience and just go straight to, what's the solution, think positive, or just the positivity is invalidating. Even though you're not verbally invalidating, you're non-verbally invalidating, right? There is a presupposition in the work that I do in NLP. We say respect for another's model of the world. That doesn't mean you have to agree with another's model of the world. It doesn't mean you have to buy into. It doesn't mean you even have to understand another's model of the world. Whatever generation, so we could talk about this. Talk about it cross-culturally with people with different identities, from parent to child, cross generation, baby boomers, X generation, I'm an X generation, generation Y, Z, elemental P, you name it, right? We can talk about respecting models of the world across generation, validating experience across generations, demographics, lived experiences, and identities. And that's how we begin to get away from this thing called spiritual bypassing, this thing called toxic positivity, is to begin to validate one's experience. And it's very, very simple. It's, I see you. I hear you. I get you. Meaning, like, I get the communication. I see there is something about what I said or something about what you saw that made you feel a certain way. How is that you're feeling? May not want to assume unless they say it, right? Then you can say, there's something about what I said, did, or there's something about what you saw, if they saw something. There's something about what you experienced. There's something about the way you're feeling that is uncomfortable. I see you. I hear you. And I even like to say, your feelings are valid, right? Now, this goes to this, it should be said that one's one's feelings being valid. So people collapse someone's feelings being valid with, now the feelings are facts. So I like to, there's a fine line, right, between the feelings being valid and the feelings being facts. Because sometimes you get a feeling, emotional reaction based on something that you experienced through your own filter. And that's why we say respect for one's model of the world, because then you have to investigate, what is the filter that person is seeing through, right? And that gives you compassion for another person when you can acknowledge that there's a filter that they might be seeing through. Now, that doesn't mean you invalidate their filter. It's just like really just noticing and asking sometimes if you have that kind of rapport with a person, and if it's an appropriate time. Sometimes it's just a time to validate the experience. Sometimes it's just the time to see a person. That's it. And maybe later, when that person's in a different space, asking, I wonder, what lens were you seeing that through, right? For yourself, it's the same way. We invalidate our own experiences. I know I have to practice over and over, reminding myself that my feelings and my experiences are valid. And so sometimes we invalidate our own experiences. And we have to remember that our experiences are valid. And then also look at, what is the filter? What is the lens through which we are experiencing that? And we can ask ourselves, well, could there be another lens? Could there be another way? Right? So you thought this was going to be a whole discourse on spiritual bypassing. Yeah, this was the intro to it. We're going to talk about it a little bit, but I want to give you a little bit deeper. I want to give you the access to something different. I want to give you the tools and the access to begin avoiding that spiritual bypassing or stopping that behavior, right? Naming it as well. How do you reframe that behavior? I want to give you the tools and the access to begin to move beyond spiritual bypassing, not just talk about it. I mean, if y'all been following me and y'all listen to my podcast, if you all listen to these lives that I do, every week, that I'm going to come with the tool, the next thing, the thing beyond just the thing I'm talking about. Because I think it's important that you take one thing away that you can practice now. You can go now and you can name this is that thing called spiritual bypassing. Or, man, the positivity feels a little bit toxic to me, right? Or you can go and you can say, what lens am I viewing this through? Or you can validate someone and say, I see you. I hear you. I believe you. Or I got your communication, right? Validate whether it's an adult or a child or whatever relationship it is. So, with that said, I'm going to put a pin in it for now because I think that I've given you all quite a few possible actions to take. And I do hope that you truly go out in the world and make some shifts and changes. And you all know what I do. You know that I teach the tools of conscious language. I teach the language of transformation. I teach people how to reframe and manage their emotional and mental states, how to be resilient, how to be flexible in behavior and communication. I also teach people the tools to go deeper and to heal those old things, the reasons why we spiritual bypass and sometimes be positively toxic or toxic positively in the first place, right? What we're avoiding. I teach people those tools, and I do those in my 1 week training retreats um, right here in Atlanta. So if you want to come spend some time with me in Atlanta, you want to come retreat away from whatever it is that you do from day to day, and you want to have some transformational learning and come away with some real tools that you can, use day one, then you know how to reach me. Reach out to me. We have training coming up in September and in November. And so, um, holla at a sister or share this if you know someone that also may be interested in this. So, with that said, y'all have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm so glad, Douglas, that you appreciate the personal growth sessions. Yes. Um, have a wonderful rest of the day. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Share this with others, please, because I do believe that these sessions do impact people, whether they end up coming and retreat with me. Yes, that's right. Flexibility needs to be directed towards the success of your directed intention. I love that, Gia. Thank you for chiming in. I think that these are the sessions that make impact, whether they end up coming and spending a week retreat with me in my training and getting some new tools, or whether they take it and they apply it, or whether they end up wanting to come and do some personal transformation work. Either way, I think just sharing this information gives people something that they can take with them on a day-to-day basis. All right. So, looking forward to next week. I always got some new topic. I don't even know what I'm talking about next week, but I will let you all know next Tuesday. And I may do a pop up between now and then. Hmm. Be on the lookout. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful rest of the day and rest of the week. Namaste.